Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to the Amlet podcast. This episode 9 is when we're still studying the Navajo creation story, but we are shifting into the story of death and how it came into the fourth world. So, in our previous episode, First Man, First Woman, Great Coyote, the Holy People, Turquoise Boy, and White Shell Girl created the sun, the moon, the months, and the changing seasons. That act brought light and order into the fourth world, but it also brought time, which, as we all know, carries a difficult consequence. When Turquoise Boy and White Shell Girl agreed to become the sun and moon, they asked to be repaid with the lives of all beings who lived upon the earth, through the air, and inhabited the water. First man, first woman, Great Coyote, and the holy people accepted that condition. Now, at the end of the sun's very first journey, the people encounter death. So before we begin, I want to acknowledge the terminology used in this section. The translation here that we have refers to one of the Nedley twins as a hermaphrodite. That word is now considered outdated and inappropriate when applied to human beings. And so, in discussing the character, I will generally use the name Nodley or refer to the twins as Nodley figures whose identities resist a simple male female division. And we have encountered this dynamic in previous episodes. So, as you listen, consider this question that I will answer by the end. So, why might a creation story present death as both a loss and a necessary part of life? Have your copies at the ready and take notes if you wish. There is only one paragraph in this section of the Navajo creation story, so I'll read it through and explain it afterwards as I have done in previous episodes. So let's go. Late in the first day, when the sun was finishing his first journey across the sky, one of the twins, Nodley, stopped breathing. Afraid, the people left her alone. In the morning, the coyote named First Angry, and the people went to find the twin, but Nodley was gone. One man looked down the reed into the third world, and there he saw Nodley sitting by the side of the river, combing her hair. He called to his friend, and he looked and also saw her. The people asked Coyote what to do. He took a black rock and threw it into Blackwater Lake. He said that if the rock came up and floated, the spirit of the dead person would return to the fourth world, and there would be no death. If the rock sank, the spirit would stay in the world below, and there would be death. The rock sank, and the people knew then that the twin was dead, and First Man remembered the agreement they had made with the sun. 4 days later, the two witnesses who had looked down on the dead twin also died. The people learned that it is dangerous to look on the dead. The people were all mad at Coyote for this and gathered around to beat him. Coyote said they could beat him, but first he had something to say. I threw the rock in the water knowing that it would sink. The people darkly muttered about this to one another, the whole of them deciding that Coyote really did deserve a good beating. But quick thinking, Coyote finished this explanation. Without death, the world would soon be overpopulated. The elders would never die and would stay stuck in their infirm bodies. There would be no room for new children. They would run out of food and shelter with so many people to feed and take care of. The gathered group was silent for a bit, while all of them contemplated Coyote's rationale and found him to be wise and intelligent. Man, that first angry. It hurts, but I think he's right. So, the first sentence of this section connects death directly to the movement of the sun, naturally, having made his first journey across the sky when Nadley stops breathing, ending the first day with the first human death. Before the creation of the sun and moon, then people may have experienced some change and movement or conflict, but time had not been organized into days, months, and years yet. Now that life is measured, now that we have beginnings, we must also have endings. Nodley stops breathing, but the people do not yet know whether she will return. It's new to them. They've never seen this before. And so the people here are afraid and they leave Nodley alone for the most part, which is maybe an understandable response because they've never encountered death before and it's shocking. And to their credit, they really don't know what's happened to her. Their fear, though, should clue us to the reality we may have already know all too well. Human beings must learn how to respond to death. I think sometimes if you are listening to this podcast and you maybe recall the first person that you love that died, or if you are a member of a church community and you've been to a first funeral, you really don't know how to respond the first time. And it's very difficult to even comfort our loved ones when we are dealing with this so soon in our lives, or if we haven't had much experience with it. So we have to learn. And death may now be a part of the world, but the people have no customs yet for mourning, for burial, or remembrance. And they've not yet developed a cultural language for loss. And I hope that comparison for you with how much we have in the English language to help us in that culture of loss, it is very useful, and it helps, keep people with their chins up, knowing that somebody's there for them. But the Navajo tradition at this stage in their creation story, they didn't have those tools in their pocket. So when the people return in the morning, Nodlay's body is gone. One man looks down through the reed into the third world, and there he sees Nodley sitting beside the river and combing her hair. There's no suffering and there's no punishment. She just continues to exist in another place. The dead, therefore, do not appear to vanish completely. Nodley has left the fourth world, but her spirit remains present in the world below. And so for the Navajo, death is separation, maybe not total annihilation. The image of her combing her hair also preserves her identity, which is precious too, I think, and something for us to chew on with maybe some of the traditions or the lack thereof that any of my listeners may have when it comes to what happens after life. She is still recognizably herself and continues just an ordinary personal action. The afterlife retains some familiarity too, and effectively so. The third world has now become the world of the dead. The man calls a friend to look, and the second witness confirms that the vision is true. And so, to be sure, witnessing the death has consequences in Navajo culture. 4 days later, of course, both of these men die. The people learn that it's dangerous to look directly upon the dead. And with this, we can learn that the worlds of the living and the dead remain connected in the Navajo tradition, but they must not be entered carelessly. The people can know that the dead continue elsewhere without continually looking upon them. Some faith and understanding in that. The warning may also express the emotional danger of remaining fixed upon upon death. We often do that in grief, and grief naturally draws the living toward the person they have lost, but the living must eventually turn back toward their own world and responsibilities, even when it hurts, and even when it kind of feels ridiculous and silly, and even if we are dealing with an existential crisis in the midst of that pain. It is wise and necessary for us to turn back to our own worlds eventually because we have our own lives to live. And so to remain completely absorbed in the dead can pull a person away from their own life. The people then ask First Angry what they should do. So this is curious, considering that First Angry has repeatedly wreaked so much havoc so far, and he's a trickster. He's not a villain. First Angry chooses a black rock and throws it into Blackwater Lake. If the stone floats, the spirits of the dead will return. If it sinks, then death will be permanent. And as First Angry the trickster would do, the stone sinks. At that moment, First Man remembers the agreement made with the sun, and effectively death exists because it is part of the price of cosmic order. And it also exists because Coyote deliberately chooses the sinking stone. So, two truths absolutely can exist at once. One cause is often too simplistic of an explanation for something so permanent as well. And I often say to my students, whether they're online or in person, uh, you got to have more than one reason to want to do something. And if we think that there's just one reason for something happening, we may want to look a little bit deeper. There are usually two or more. The people become furious with First Angry, and he admits that he knew the stone would sink, and so he intentionally chooses death. And the people gather around him, and they're going to beat him up. I mean, they're resorting to fists. So for a moment, Coyote appears to have gone way too far, even for this community and his patterns of behavior, and they've endured so many of his disruptions. His first explanation makes the situation, I think, even worse because he's like, quote, I threw the rock in the water knowing that it would sink. The people hear this as proof that he deserves punishment, and their response may seem totally relatable because it's difficult to accept mortality. And in grief or in our ignorance, and when we lean on our own understanding, how we act in death is also kind of curious. We'll see some who will project their grief onto others, and it makes the whole mourning process way worse. And that's probably what these people are doing with First Angry, too. And he becomes the figure upon whom they can place their grief and their anger. And we do, so often, search for someone or something to blame when death occurs. Loss tends to create such helplessness, and blame temporarily creates this feeling that the loss might have been prevented somehow, and it gives us back some sense of control. The people surround Coyote because they cannot strike death itself. And Coyote explains his reasoning, as I think he does. He's pretty upfront that without death, the world would be overcrowded. Elders would remain forever in age weakened bodies. There would be no room for new children. Plus, food and shelter would eventually become scarce. And essentially, mortality would create its own kind of suffering that would be too much. And at first, a world without death may seem ideal because we wouldn't lose our parents, our children, our partners, friends, or members of the community. But Coyote asks the people to imagine the long term consequences. First Angry is looking at the long view. If no one ever died, life would continue accumulating without renewal. And we know renewal is so integral to the Navajo tradition if you have stayed with me in these episodes as long as you have so far. And the people become silent as they consider Coyote's explanation, and they ultimately decide that his reasoning is wise and intelligent, even though moments earlier they wanted to beat him to a pulp. Coyote's argument gives sorrow a place within the larger order of life. The community can still mourn those who are lost while understanding that mortality serves a larger purpose. Yes, First Angry is a trickster who disrupts, but the poetic and beautiful effect of disruption is that it yields wisdom, wherein a perfect world it would not. It should not be lost on us that the first person to die, the Nodley twin, is significant because it marks another boundary. Nodley has already represented an identity that moves beyond simple categories, and now Nodley stands between the worlds of the living and the dead. It's not even, it's not punishable, it's not rejected. The episode, therefore, should not be interpreted as suggesting that her identity caused the death. Instead, she becomes the first guide into a new human condition that everyone will eventually share. And so, as we finish this installment, I'd like us to return to my opening question. Why might a creation story present death as both a loss and a necessary part of life? Well, the answer is to further reestablish that importance of relationships, in my view. The people fear what has happened to Nodley. They search for her. They grieve. They become angry when first angry makes death permanent. But death is also necessary because life must continue through renewal. Mortality is a part of the larger balance, but the dead remain part of the story, even when they no longer remain physically among the living. I know that many of my listeners take up a cause or set a goal or make art in remembrance of someone they have loved and lost. You may even be here in school because you promised somebody that you would do something more with your life or something special. And that essence is the end of this coming of death section of the Navajo creation story. They mourned her, they loved her, and they will remember her and perpetuate her through storytelling. And in that way, and in many others, our loved ones remain. And the beauty of life exists partly because it does not last forever. And so thank you for listening to the Amlet podcast again. And I'll see you soon for more mythology of the Navajo in the stars this time. So I will see you soon and take care.